on Unsolved Mysteries.
Meet three incredible animals whose courage meant the difference between life and death. What fantastic psychic powers transform these ordinary house pets into extraordinary heroes. And from the realm of the unexplained, a young boy describes in vividly accurate detail the death of a Civil War soldier. A mother is stunned by her 2-year-old daughter's chilling account of a freak accident and a watery grave. Are these remarkable stories proof that reincarnation is real? From the current case file, a beautiful young businesswoman, an intimate rendezvous, a shocking plunge from a hotel balcony. The police must decide, was it an accident or murder? Glendeen Butterfield and her niece Kellyanne Ayres were as close as any mother and daughter. But some 20 years ago, circumstances forced them apart. Our viewers could help bring them back together again. It is a twisted and deadly scheme. Booby-trap packages, cleverly disguised as promotional gifts and delivered through the mail, courtesy of a madman. Join me for these intriguing cases. Perhaps you may be able to solve one of tonight's unsolved mysteries. Children, we think of them as innocents, raw clay to be molded, blank slates eager for life's lessons, lessons taught by family, friends, and teachers. But some people believe children can also be strongly influenced by more otherworldly forces, experiences gleaned not just from other people, but from other lifetimes. Reincarnation is a theme that runs through all the cultures of the world. There is no proof, unless you believe the accounts of those who have no reason to lie, those who possess specific knowledge and insights they are far too young to have. Consider first the case of 5-year-old Chase Bowman. It was a 4th of July, 1988. Chase's mother says he became inexplicably terrified by the fireworks.
Not only terrified, he was hysterical. He was crying and screaming, and I had to take him home. And I thought that that was very unusual because he had never responded to fireworks that way before.
Over the next few months, Chase's fear of explosive noises intensified, becoming a phobia.
All right, Chase, I want to try something. Close your eyes and relax.
For help, Carol Bowman turned to a friend who was a hypnotherapist.
And breathe out slowly. Now, I want you to think of a sound that frightens you. A sound.
The hypnotherapist had barely begun when Chase suddenly seemed transported to another place and time. A battlefield during the American Civil War.
There's lots of smoke. There's a war going on. I'm a black soldier. I'm behind a rock with a big gun and a sword at the end.
Well, I was shocked. He started curling up in my lap as if he were afraid, and I could feel him trembling as he described what it was like with gunfire all around him and what it was like to be crouching behind a rock. I could feel him crouching in my lap.
In his mind's eye, Chase's past life unreal, a kaleidoscopic rush of images. In the heat of battle, he was struck by a bullet, his wrist shattered. Comrades dragged into a crude field hospital. The wound was bandaged. Then he was sent back to the front to man a cannon.
Chase said he saw himself walking back into battle, and he was killed behind the cannon. He died very suddenly. I was amazed because it sounded so true and so real and so plausible, but I could feel that it was true. I just knew it.
And I'm looking down on a valley.
At that point in Chase's life, when he was 5, I knew what he watched on television because we carefully regulated it. He watched Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, period. And I never had read books to him about the Civil War. As far as I could tell, there was no way he could have known that.
Chase later drew these rough sketches of the field hospital and the cannon. Civil War buffs have found the details amazingly accurate.
In my opinion, it's rather remarkable that the child, having not had any sort of background or experience in viewing scenes from the Civil War, his placement of the horse and the wagon and the artillery piece is pretty consistent with the mode of transportation of cannon during the Civil War.
It was a wow experience. You know, I knew that something extraordinary had happened. And what made it even more extraordinary was that immediately after this regression, within a few days, a severe eczema, a chronic eczema that he had on his right wrist where he said he had been hit by a bullet, completely cleared up. And not only that, as the months went by, I saw that Chase's phobia of loud noises completely disappeared too.
Carol Bowman is a professional writer. She was so intrigued by her son's experience, she started researching a book on children's past lives. As it turned out, material was abundant.
At the time, Leah was a little over 2. She was about 2.5 years old, and we were driving near our home. It was wintertime. She was about 2.5. She was in the back seat in her car seat, where she always was. And we were driving down a hill, and the sun was shining, and all of a sudden, I hear this little voice in the back seat pipes up. She goes, "Mommy, this is just like where I died."
What?
I was a little shocked, I'm thinking, what is she talking about? I was a little horrified that she's even thinking about death at that age, I mean, it shook me enough that I pulled off the road.
Sweetie, what did you just say?
I was driving in the car, it fell off the bridge, and I was in the water.
Where was Mommy?
You weren't with me that time.
There was a feeling that came over me of this was really important, that this is big news, like the basement is on fire, kind of something that you really want to pay attention to, and that it was a different moment from any conversation that we had had previously.
Well, who drove the car?
I was big, I could use the pedals. I was driving.
She said that
My
basically
dad had a-
she fell off the bridge and she fell into the water, and she said, I fell out of the car. I could feel the rocks on my head, and I could look up and see the bubbles going up, and she said I could see the light on the shiny bridge.
And that's where I died.
I don't think she could have possibly made it up. If it had been another child, I might have been much more skeptical. But I was home full time with her at that point, and very controlling about what she saw and what she read. She didn't watch any television. She didn't really go to any movies. She wasn't exposed. She could not have possibly had a frame of reference for this experience.
What stands out for me is the fact that small children who've not been contaminated with adult ideas or concepts are telling us that something of us does survive death.
My son Blake taught me a very spiritual lesson that we have lived before and will probably live again. And I've got no doubt that this is what happened.
Mommy!
Blake, what's the matter? Are you okay?
My ear hurts. It really hurts.
Colleen Hawkins' son Blake was only 3 years old when he startled his mother with a horrifying story.
What truck? Who hit you with the truck?
A man.
A man hit you with a truck? Someone outside? Were you outside?
No, not now. Before. A man hit me with a big truck. He drove over me. And I died.
I thought that I would trick him in a way to see if he had his facts right. And so I said, "Oh, this happened on TV, right?" And he said, "No, it happened in the street." He was getting irritated with me at this point because he knew his facts and he felt I should know what happened also.
We don't give kids nearly as much credit for being
Some
aware
experts
and
believe there is a
knowing
perfectly rational explanation for all of these episodes.
There's some very creative kids out there, and all kids fantasize to a certain degree, and so the chances that they'll come up with something startling and unusual in that kind of a rich fantasy life is very high.
I got hit by
And when you look at it that way, these cases fall apart, that there are lots of prosaic explanations for how they could possibly know this information without it necessarily coming from a past life.
However, the parents of the children involved are convinced those experiences are not only real, but also beneficial.
I believe that remembering past lives can be very healing for the child. It can help them leave the past behind and move on into present reality. And I think it can be marvelously healing for the adults too. It can give them new insights into who their child is as a soul, and will give them a completely different perspective on life and death.
A well-known physician once said, "All the honest truth-telling there is in the world is done by children." Carol Bowman has now collected dozens of case histories of children's past lives, examples she believes are well beyond the scope of any child's imagination. So if you're not listening to the stories your kids tell you, perhaps you should be. Coming up, a romantic interlude takes a stunning twist when a young woman falls to her death from a hotel balcony. But first, dramatic rescues by extraordinary four-legged heroes. Some experts believe they were inspired by mysterious psychic forces. When we think of heroes, some names come readily to mind. Paul Revere, Florence Nightingale, Martin Luther King. People whose courage served to inspire us all. But few of us are familiar with such extraordinary figures as Boo, Oscar, and Ringo. Each is a household pet. Each is responsible for saving a life. Just how they did it and why is truly an unsolved mystery. We begin along the Yuba River, 80 miles north of Sacramento, California. It was a perfect setting for Lillian McDermott to exercise her Newfoundland Boo. Though already 110 pounds, Boo was just 14 months old, still a puppy.
It was the summer, and the Yuba was very inviting, and so I thought it was a great opportunity for a Newfoundland to play in the water and be in Newfoundland heaven, chasing sticks and having fun.
Unbeknownst to Lillian, a dangerous situation was developing a half-mile upstream. An amateur prospector named Link Hill had just finished dredging the river for gold and gone back out to fetch a gas can. Minutes later, when Link came into view, Boo suddenly lost interest in the game.
I leaned down to see what it was he was looking at, and I saw what I thought was a log rolling in the white water. It's all right, Boo, it's all right. It was not all right. He wouldn't stop. I looked again, and here, an arm came up out of the white water, holding a small gas can.
Lillian was at a loss, but Boo seemed to know exactly what needed to be done.
And he looked at me, steady, courageous, strong. All of those pretty words that said to me, "You need to let me go." So I did.
Go, Boo.
The minute I said the words, he shot into the water.
Boo swam straight into a strong current, driven by unknown forces to reach the helpless stranger more than 75 feet away. Boo grabbed onto Link's arm, Then, mustering all of his strength, he hauled the man back to shore.
Attaboy. Come on. Bring him. Good. Go.
As it turned out, Link Hill was a fortunate man indeed. Hill is a deaf mute, unable to speak or hear. If not for Boo's heroic actions, he would surely have drowned. How can we explain Boo's selfless act of courage? Instinct, devotion, or a true desire to save another life? Incredibly, some experts believe Boo's response may have been triggered by psychic abilities.
What that animal felt was that man's fear. And he realized that was not a log, you know, because he could feel the emotion coming from that man and the emotion of that man calling out in his mind for help. That's all that dog needed.
He's a Newfoundland.
Animal behaviorist Suzanne Hetz has a different opinion.
Bred since their development for a number of tasks, one of which is to perform water rescues. We don't have to make assumptions that he knew that the person was in danger. It's something that's innate, or some people use the term instinctive, that animals do because of their genetic heritage.
But can genetics explain the case of Oscar, a 3-year-old Chesapeake Bay Retriever? Ever since he was 7 weeks old, Oscar's been a constant companion, truly a best friend to his owner, Chris Eschenberg.
I was very conscious about socializing him properly, and he was exposed to a huge breadth of people, from very young children to very old people. He learned early on that people were good, and he just loves to be around people. And in fact, that's one of the things that's most surprising about what actually happened.
It happened on a hot July evening in 1995 as Chris returned home. The house was quiet. Odd, because Oscar usually kicked up a noisy welcome. Something was wrong. Very wrong.
Take it easy. Take it easy. What do you want? Go. Just take. Okay. Just take it easy, please. Go, please.
At that point, I then started to think about Oscar. I was worried that I was going to open the door. Oscar was going to try to greet this guy like he greets all of my friends that walk into the house, and this guy was just going to react by shooting him.
But Oscar was nowhere to be seen. He had plans of his own.
Finally, this guy was able to get his arm free, and in that action of freeing the arm, he hit me, or here, and I was a little disoriented for a moment. And by the time I regained my composure, he was gone. I could hear him getting out of the gate.
Oscar, you all right? Come here, pal.
Oscar was drenched in blood. Fortunately, it was not the blood of the courageous canine, but that of the would-be robber.
You're fine, pal. Oh, Oscar, you...
This has merely reaffirmed in me the fact that I have a very dynamic, live, interesting, intelligent creature that I'm sharing my life with, and who in this respect probably saved my life, or may very well have done that.
First off, it's almost sure that Oscar was aware of the intruder before Chris got home. He heard him, he smelled him, and whether it was territorial behavior or protective behavior or a combination of both, it's impossible to say. But he definitely took the initiative, took the offense, because of all these cues that were telling him, this is not normal, something isn't right.
Boo and Oscar personify the notion of man's best friend. However, dogs aren't the only animals capable of protecting their owners from impending danger. Ray and Carol Steiner of Bowling Green, Ohio, owe their lives to their 3-year-old red tabby cat, Ringo. During the summer of 1995, the Steiners were homebound. Ray was recovering from surgery, and Carol was incapacitated by a foot ailment. But inexplicably, both had been suffering from memory loss, high blood pressure, and chronic fatigue.
What I was noticing the most was terrible headaches, dizziness. I was sleeping all the time.
One morning in August, Carol noticed that Ringo was acting strangely.
Ringo had come in already from his early morning prowling, And we were all settled down, and all of a sudden, he wanted out again.
Okay, go on, Ringo.
I opened the door, he won't go out. So I said, okay, kitty, and closed the door.
No sooner did Carol get settled down than Ringo was at it again. So Carol opened the door again.
Come on out.
And he turns up at me and gives a really high meow. And it was obvious I was to come out, so I walked out with him.
Ringo led Carol around to the side of the house.
All of a sudden, he started digging in our landscaping.
What is it, kitty?
And then he opened up his mouth and curled his lips up as if something had a terrible smell.
That smell was lethal methane gas. Carol immediately called the gas company. Within minutes, a service technician arrived.
Let me take a reading here. He put a tool in the ground and a siren went off.
Well, this is way above normal. This is very, very unusual.
He told us we're at explosive levels. I've got to turn your gas off right now or you're going to blow.
Incredibly, the Steiners had a large split in their gas pipe at the very spot where Ringo had been digging. As a result, potentially deadly amounts of gas had been seeping into the house for months. Not only might a random spark have set off an explosion, but the Steiners were in danger of being asphyxiated.
We looked at each other, then we looked at the cat, and I said, my gosh, Ray, Ringo saved our lives. No one thought about the cat until everything settled. And my gosh, here's the hero just lying there being a cat.
What mysterious forces compelled these animals to take action when there was no one else to step forward? Was it instinct, or perhaps some unexplained psychic ability? We may never know, but to their owners it hardly matters. They are just thankful to be living under the same roof with a courageous, albeit four-legged, hero. When we return, a vicious booby trap disguised as a mail-order cookbook claims the life of a teacher in Brooklyn, New York. And later, police in Los Angeles search for clues in the mysterious death of a young businesswoman. It was May 7th, 1982, the Friday before Mother's Day. Joan Kipp, a high school guidance counselor in Brooklyn, New York, had just gotten off work. Joan and her husband had plans to leave the city and spend the weekend with their family.
Hi, honey. Are we all set?
Baby, yeah, we're ready to fly. All I have to do is get a couple more things and we're out of here.
Wonderful.
The postman left you a package.
I wonder who it's from.
I know.
The package seemed innocent in every way. It contained a cookbook from a major mail-order house. Joan assumed it was a Mother's Day gift.
Oh, it is a cookbook. Oh, terrific.
Joan Kipp had been struck in the chest by two .22 caliber bullets. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, but died that evening. No one knows who killed Joan Kipp or why. Her murder was unbelievably bizarre, shot to death by a booby-trapped cookbook. Unfortunately, more than a decade would pass before police realized it was not an isolated incident. In October of 1993, a retired New York City sanitation worker and his wife, two people with absolutely no connection to Joan Kipp, were on vacation in Pennsylvania. When their children came to visit, they brought the couple's mail.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Looks like some sort of charitable organization.
Well,
I thought we weren't going to send checks to charity organizations.
I have my favorites, and I always send checks.
Come on.
The package contained what appeared to be a gift, a commemorative medallion. In this instance, 3 people were shot, but no one was killed.
Get Lisa out of here. Get Lisa out of here. Bring him into the house. Quick.
Since then, there have been 3 more attacks, bringing the total to 5. The victims shared only 2 things in common. Each lived in the New York City area, and each had apparently been targeted by the same assassin. He is a creature of deadly habit. His deliveries are disguised to look legitimate. Each package contains a lethal homemade weapon that fires 3 bullets in different directions. The New York City press has seized upon the details and given the criminal a somewhat misleading nickname, the Zip Gun Bomber.
Zip guns was a weapon of choice for the gangs in New York in the late 50s, early 60s. They're not bombs. They don't consist of any dynamite or anything of that nature. What they basically are crudely made guns. The devices are constructed in a way to be attractive. This type of criminal certainly goes through a lot of effort. He definitely is putting it together in a way that guarantees that the receiver is going to open that package.
Yeah, because I'm going to start getting ready in a few minutes.
June 27, 1995. Stephanie Gaffney of Queens, New York was 8 months pregnant, eagerly looking forward to the birth of her daughter.
I got my senior pictures. Girl, I know they look awful.
I was talking on the phone, and I was sorting through the mail. I came across the package, and I looked at the package, and it was from a health insurance plan. It looked legitimate. I opened up the box, and inside of it was a book. And the book also looked legitimate. I mean, it looked like there were real pages and everything.
Stephanie had been struck by shrapnel from 3 bullets. Her unborn child had not been hit, but was in severe distress. Within hours, doctors induced labor, and Stephanie gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Stephanie is convinced that the only reason she and her child survived was because Stephanie was holding the book at a slight angle when she opened it.
There's no doubt about it that I'm very lucky. I know for a fact that if it happened any other way, I would not be sitting here. My daughter would not be here. So I thank God every day for that.
The attack on Stephanie Gaffney was as mystifying as those which preceded it. The authorities have no concrete theories, and at this point they don't even know if the victims were selected at random or targeted for some specific unknown reason.
I believe that it is random. I believe that, you know, it was just one of those things that just happened. It could have been someone else. It just happened to be me.
In June of 1996, it just happened to be a retired real estate agent in Brooklyn, New York. He narrowly escaped injury when he opened a parcel from a local charity.
The public should never open up a package when they don't know who sent the package to them. People should remember that one of the easiest things to do is to call the return address on a package. Number 1, to see if it's a legitimate return address, and number 2, to ask if someone does answer the phone, what did you send me?
Next, a young woman falls to her death from a hotel balcony. Did a passionate rendezvous go tragically wrong? November 21st, 1996. Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies use a dummy fashioned out of fire hose to perform a macabre experiment. 9 days earlier, a woman had fallen from this hotel balcony, plummeting to her death 10 stories below. Was it an accident? Did she commit suicide? Or was she murdered? The victim was Sandra Oriana. She turned 27 years old on November 12th, the same day she arrived in California on a business trip with this man, her boss, 33-year-old Robert Salazar. The two worked for Skillmaster, a national employment agency based in Houston, Texas. Sandra was a workers' compensation claims specialist, engaged to be married. Robert Salazar was the general manager of operations. He has a wife and 2 children.
Sandra had worked at Skillmaster for about a year and a half. She'd been promoted very rapidly to the manager of the Safety and Health Division.
Attorney Michael Cito represents Sandra Oriana's family.
Her work was highly enough regarded that Salazar ostensibly took her to Los Angeles to interview for a high-level position with a company that Skillmaster had just acquired in California.
On the morning of November 12th, Sandra and Salazar checked into adjacent rooms on the 8th floor of the Sheraton Hotel in the City of Industry, just outside Los Angeles. At 6:30 the next morning, another hotel guest spotted Sandra's body sprawled on the ground below. Police immediately questioned Robert Salazar. He reportedly told them that he had escorted Sandra to her room around midnight. He stayed for only a moment. When he left, Sandra was alive and well.
When Mr. Salazar first told that story, it was a believable story. It was only after we, the homicide detectives, began looking inside the room and determined that his underwear was in the room that we did not believe him.
The police questioned Salazar again. They say he proceeded to tell a very different story.
He said that he had, in fact, gone into the room with Sandra and that they had engaged in sex, and that at one point they were on the balcony. Sandra had positioned herself on the railing of the balcony in such a way that she threw one of her legs over the top of the balcony and lost her balance and had fallen.
Sandra's family is outraged by Salazar's allegations.
Family believes that Sandra would never have engaged in any consensual relationship with Robert Salazar. First, she was very devoted to her fiancé. Secondly, she didn't believe in romantic relationships at work.
We talked to the folks that worked with Sandra and Mr. Salazar, and they were very, very shocked that Sandra and Salazar would have anything to do with each other in a sexual or romantic way.
Salazar contends he and Sandra had not been romantically involved until that evening. Several witnesses confirm that the couple was seen in the hotel bar, drinking, holding hands, and kissing. After that, Salazar told police they went up to Sandra's 8th floor room. A short time later, Sandra fell off the balcony. Salazar told no one about the alleged accident, simply went back to his room. The next morning, he waited in the hotel lobby as though expecting Sandra. He even left a message on her room's voicemail asking where she was. Lieutenant Peavy used the dummy to test Salazar's account of how and where Sandra Oriana went over the railing.
The dummy landed a number of feet from where Sandra actually landed, close to 15 feet at one dropping, and another time I believe it was 12 feet. So it was never even close to where she actually landed. And we tried it several times, and we actually ended up trying to make it land where she landed, and we had to basically throw the dummy in that direction to make it land there.
Another perplexing point. The balcony railing is 44 inches tall. Sandra Oriana was 5 feet 2, only 18 inches taller than the railing.
I don't believe that it's possible that she could have fallen off the balcony. I think that something else caused her to fall off the balcony that Mr. Salazar has not yet revealed. We want to get to the truth so that we can explain away all the questions. Whether we ever will or not remains to be seen.
When we return, a poignant tale of lost love. Perhaps you can help reunite Glendeen Butterfield and her niece. Raising a child means a never-ending series of hard choices. It's difficult enough for a parent. It can sometimes be even tougher when you've been entrusted with a child that is not your own. Glendeen Butterfield knows that all too well. For more than 2 decades, she's been haunted by a decision she made about her brother's daughter.
Bob!
It was the fall of 1969. Glendeen's first glimpse of her niece, Kellyanne, was a result of a hard-fought battle.
She's so beautiful.
Glendeen's brother, Bob Ayers, was in the Army and was being shipped to Germany. He and Kellyanne's mother had separated, and neither could care for Kellyanne. The Army planned to put the baby in an orphanage, but Aunt Glendeen wouldn't hear of it. She went up the chain of command, straight to the office of the president.
About 2 days later, the base commander at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, called me and said that anybody would go that length to keep a kid out of an orphanage, that the Army would give my brother a grant and leave to bring her to me.
Once Bob Ayers gave Kellyanne to Glendeen, he abandoned all interest in the child. Glendeen was on her own.
I didn't hear from him for a long time. I mean, a real long time. I think it was probably maybe 3 years, we'll say 3 years. And he just kind of like disappeared, you know.
Kellyanne spent those years happily growing up with Glendeen and her 2 daughters in Central California.
We just thought of her as a little sister, because we got her, she was a baby, she was real tiny, so she was no different than my sister Vicky, except for more fun. She liked her horse, she liked riding horses, she just did everything that anybody's normal kid would do. I mean, no different than them, except they were a little older. You know, I mean, she just happy, go lucky.
In 1974, Bob Ayers suddenly showed up out of the blue. He moved into Glendeen's apartment, but still displayed little interest in being a father. That apparently changed when a woman nicknamed Kitty set up housekeeping in the same building. Less than a week later, Bob made 2 astonishing decisions. First, he moved in with Kitty. Second, without saying a word to Glendeen, he took Kellyanne with him.
You like those new toys Daddy got you?
Yeah.
You like staying in the apartment, don't you, huh? Well, we love having you here.
They moved her out after Bob going knowing this woman for a day or 2. And I just went into hysterics over it. I mean, you know, this is my kid.
Kelly! Kelly, Bob!
With the help of the police, Glendeen got Kellyanne back, but the battle over the child was just beginning. Within a few months, Glendeen says Kellyanne changed. She had become an unhappy, bewildered little girl.
Much too sad for Christmas. I just don't understand. Kitty wants me to call her Mommy, and Uncle Bob wants me to call him Daddy.
The situation became worse when Bob sued Glendeen for custody.
I've heard arguments from both sides, and I've just had a nice long chat with Kellyanne in my chamber. She's a very bright, intelligent child. She really wants to stay with Glendeen. She's very happy where she is. So, I find for the respondent.
I don't think I've ever been so happy.
Visitation rights.
The judge said that Kitty and Bob could have visitation rights.
6 months, we will review the situation.
They would see her when they weren't supposed to. They would talk to her, tell her things. And It just kept her in a world of little confusion, you know? I mean, you think of a little girl 5 years old or 4.5, 5 years old in a state of confusion.
To minimize the conflict, Glendeen moved to a small town in Nevada. Bob's visits with Kellyanne were now limited to twice a year, but for Glendeen, even that was too much.
The first time they took her and brought her back, she was so depressed and just withdrawn, and it was horrible.
She doesn't even know what it's like to have a father.
No, but she knows what it's like to have a mother and to have sisters and have a whole life.
Yeah, but you are not the mom, and I am her real father, and you know that.
You are not taking her.
Yes, I am.
It got to the point that I was so concerned about her mental well-being, you know, for when she got older and everything, that I decided I needed to keep her away from my brother Bob and Kitty.
You want to start a war, you just started one. Let's go, Kitty.
Much as she wanted to keep Kellyanne, Glendeen felt it was impossible. She could think of only one alternative: Kellyanne's birth mother, Marion. Marion was in the Air Force. She had remarried and had 2 sons. Glendeen believed she could provide the stable environment Kellyanne needed.
So because of that, you want to give up custody to this lady?
No, it's not that I want to. But I do think it'd be best for Kellyanne.
The judge agreed to the plan.
I ran into her, you know.
Soon after, Glendeen kissed Kellyanne goodbye and left her with her new family.
We're gonna miss you so much. I love you. I don't want you to go. I don't want her to go. I don't want to be without you. But listen, I'll be calling you really soon, okay? Okay.
I couldn't believe I lost my child. I mean, this was my child. And I couldn't believe that I lost her, that I didn't have her anymore.
Well, your sisters and I sure miss you.
The last time Glendeen spoke to Kellyanne was at Christmas time in 1976.
Okay.
She told me she missed me and she loved me, and I told her I loved her. And, you know, it was like a kind of not a real long conversation, but just, you know, I felt wonderful when I talked to her.
I'll sure do that.
The next time Glendeen called, however, the line was disconnected. Since that moment, all of her efforts to track Kellyanne have failed. By 1983, Glendeen and her brother Bob had patched up their differences. From then until Bob died in a farm accident in 1994, their sole focus was finding Kellyanne.
There hasn't been one day went by since I gave her up that I haven't thought of her a dozen times and wondered, is she okay? Does she need anything? Is she happy? Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? I just wish I knew.
On our next Unsolved Mysteries, when a popular exotic dancer is found murdered, police are left with only one solid clue: the voice of an anonymous caller who reported the crime. Join me next time for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.